Thanks for tuning in to Boxcar Artz. I'm Jesse Britton, and I wanted to share with you my method for doing micro tattoos. Let's get right into it. Please know that this video is for tattoo apprentices and tattooers that have already started working out of a tattoo shop, and in no way is this video intended to replace a proper tattoo apprenticeship. I can go into why you're going to need a proper apprenticeship as opposed to scratching in a future video. I'm using my critical 4.2mm stroke machine, and I'm also using a Type 3 cartridge liner from Bishop. I'm being really careful here not to create too solid of a line on the leg of the angel and more of a solid line in the cloak. That's because the leg is a lighter tone and it will be shaded lighter around it, and the cloak is darker in that area. So I'm really careful to match my outline with the darkness of the reference, if that makes sense. I don't want to put too dark of a line down and then have to come back later and shade a darker tone next to it so you don't just see a big heavy outline. Also, I've noticed with the critical machine, I don't have to turn the voltage up as high as, say, that I would with the IDavinci or the Bishop rotary. So I'm using a 6.5 to 7.5 volts for this outline. It varies depending on size of the needle and how dark I want it to be, but generally I'd say most of this tattoo outline that you're watching right now was done with around 7 volts. My client has a lighter skin complexion, so I'm being really careful just to graze the skin, which, as you can see, does the trick. Again, the critical machine is a powerful machine. It doesn't really gush ink, which is also good for tight liners and fine line work, so you don't get too much of a puddle and lose your outline by wiping all the ink away or just getting too crazy of a puddle. So you can see that I'm being really careful on this line to gently feather in the ink until it gets darker. So here's a darker spot, and again, if I do push down too hard or turn my machine up too high in any of these lines, they're gonna become thicker and more bold and maybe even raised, and they're gonna overpower any shading and just create too much of a visual impact. So I'm being really careful just to gently feather in these lines here. Realistic tattooing is mostly about the shading, and I see some realistic tattooers do realistic tattoos without any outlines. However, over time, the hard edges on those tend to bleed out and fade. So lines really do matter, even in realistic tattooing. Unless you're just going for a super smoky soft effect in the whole piece, which is really rare. So here I'm going to do kind of some gentle whip shading, just kind of getting some of these edges that are a little bit too tight for even, say, like a round shader. So this is me just kind of peppering in some of these lines here and some of the shading. I do this because I get a little bit more control over how much gets shaded, and you can see that I'm still getting that kind of light line. I'm just dragging gently the needle away. Even though I'm doing a gentle drag, I'm still getting a significant amount of ink into the tattoo. One of the guiding principles of any realistic endeavor as far as tattooing or drawing is the principle of dark to light away from an edge. So here you can see I'm doing darker shading and I'm coming off of that hard black outline to create the illusion of bringing that piece of the cloak forward. So dark to light away. So dark shading fading into a lighter shading away from an edge brings an edge forward. So like the darker the edge is against the white or against the lighter part, you're going to have a more realistic impact. It's going to visually bring that edge forward or that piece of cloak forward. Also, I know some tattooers and some artists suggest tattooing in some of the lighter parts first before they get super heavy with the dark. just getting in there and creating a lighter field so you know what your lightest light is going to look like. And then when you hit your dark, you get a super dark impact. So it's sometimes black and gray shading is like layering. There's a lot of layering involved, but you can overdo it easily. So it's good to keep your machine hitting the tattoo softly, but not so soft that you're not seeing anything happen. I'm going to bring the voltage down because I'm going to show you a little bit more of this technique of using just the liner to shade in. So if you're doing stippling on a micro-realistic piece, one of the things you can do is turn your liner down and just kind of do a drag kind of method like I'm doing here. Like I'm scraping, I'm brushing, and I'm kind of just dragging the needle a little bit faster than the liner is going. So that really gets that cool effect. That's one of the most common approaches for micro-realism. However, I just don't see micro-realism a lot of times hold up down here in Florida because, I'll do tattoos on folks and they go out and they don't put sunblock on and they're surfers, and 7 to 8 months to a year later, these tiny little pieces just disappear. Even if they're not surfers, a lot of times if you don't really, put enough of a substantial mark into the skin, a dark enough mark into the skin, then those tattoos, however much money these people have paid you to do their tattoos, they've completely faded out. I've also had people come in complaining about micro-realistic tattoos that took, upwards of 5 hours and cost upwards of $800 to do one of them. And I'm looking at, it's beautifully done. I mean, all of it's shaded well and it looks good. However, it faded out so much that these people feel kind of like they got cheated. All right, now we're getting into doing some of the actual darks, and you can see why I put down some of the dark outline on this piece in those places. So, and not even if I didn't put a super heavy dark outline, I'm gonna butt my mag right up to the edge of that darkest area, and I'm gonna tattoo with it kind of at an angle, not just straight forward, and I'm gonna really get it as dark as I can with one pass, nice and slow. This is still running about 5.6, 5.8 volts on a critical torque, so it's going to go faster than, say, your Bishop. So just remember that. If you're watching a tattoo tutorial and somebody says use this volt, yeah, that's great. You could use that volt, but you might only be using it for the machine that they're working with, So, like if I was doing this same tattoo with a Bishop machine, I feel like the Bishop, those are my two main rotary machines, is a Bishop and a critical. I feel like the Bishop is like kind of a longer stroke and a little bit more like tattooing with a coil machine. It almost seems to have a little bit of give. This critical machine doesn't really have that at all. Like you just want to tattoo off the tips of the needles. You don't want to bury that needle. You don't have to. You're just kind of grazing the skin with it and making your ovals and getting that, that in there in one pass. And as you can see, that works really well. And here is pretty much a dark, curve into the cloak of the angel. And I'm just going to go right in here and pack it in with solid black. And next to it, I'm going to do like a mid-tone. So right now I've poured 3 ink caps. I've got a dark, I've got a super black, I've got a mid-tone, and I've got a super light wash. If you're interested in how I do those, set up my black and gray wash, please subscribe to my channel. I'll be going over all of this if I get enough subscribers and enough attention from this channel to become monetized. So please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you like what I'm doing, I need a little bit of support to continue to do this, as I'm already doing full-time tattooing and running a small business. All right, here I'm going to speed it up for you guys because I know you're like me and you've probably got the attention span of a goldfish. So we're going to run through this real quick. What I'm doing is I'm packing in a lot of the solid black in between the legs. And as you can see on the left leg, there's a little, I left a little bit of an edge there of the light, kind of like a highlight. And that is creating even more of a image of bringing it forward. Okay, so here we're continuing to do the dark to light away from the object, and in the upper left hand corner I put the original reference image, which I think is just super epic. I also bumped up the contrast on this a little bit on my Procreate and removed the background just so I can really focus on the angel as a standalone piece. Again, it's not super micro-realism, it's just like a smaller realistic piece. And knowing how to do this can come in handy when you're working on a bigger piece, say with smaller angels. You've got some size variation, you've got like a larger, image in the back of like, the bearded, image of a large bearded man, or you've got like a warrior, or you've got something that is that takes up the majority of the composition, and you've got some smaller stuff to bring the eye around the rest of the piece, and you want it to look good. You want it to be impactful. So here we are, just kind of still packing in that solid black. I'm not scared of using heavy dark. I don't think that's ever a bad thing. Some people these days, they like lighter tattoos, but I've always felt like bold, beautiful, like heavy images. Not only do they hold up better over time, but they also have like this really powerful look, So from across a room, you're going to say, oh man, that is like Archangel Michael from that sculpture in Italy, if someone crosses the room to ask you about your tattoo, then we did a good job. Okay, so as you can see, if you look at the reference up in the upper left-hand corner, pretty much all of this is black, and I just decided to keep using my 5 curve mag, the IDavinci 5 curve mag, to pack this in. You could, yes, switch it out with a larger grouping and roll through it a little bit faster. However, I just wanted to show you some of my process. I like to use ovals. I like to barely, hit the skin, and I like to make sure that if I do any overlapping, that I'm barely touching the skin, so as not to cause scabbing, which is pretty common. You can like go back over something that you've just tattooed and cause some pretty severe scabbing. So like I try to avoid that. But yeah, I wanted to speed through this part just so you could see. All right, here we go. We're getting into more of the cloak. And again, I'm just going to pack in a lot of this super, super black, following the reference in the upper left-hand corner. I'm just packing in black where I can. And it's also going to make the shading that we did earlier, see on the leg, how much lighter that shading looks on the leg compared to all that heavy black in the background. It's a glorious thing. It really is. And picking reference, I feel like, is super important too. Like I try to pick the right reference for each piece. Like, is this going to be impactful? Is it super light and faded out already, or is this something that is gonna go with what the client wants? My client here had already done like a whole octopus on his other leg, which was heavy, super dark, and so. When he wanted to do this on the other leg, kind of a micro-realistic angel, I wanted it to match the super dark octopus tentacles he's got on the other leg. So again, I think it's important to try to like keep all your tattoos congruous on your client so that they start to have that look, like whatever it is, they have a look. So here we go. I'm speeding it up again. Listen, if you've made it this far, then you have definitely you're investing time into your career, and you should be very proud of that. Not a lot of people have the ability to really take the time out and invest this much. They just want to learn how to tattoo real quick and easy and start making that money and do all that, and that's great, but there's going to come a point where we need to evolve as artists. I've always tried to watch other tattoo artists and learn from other artists, and YouTube is a great way to share that knowledge, and I've learned a lot of things from watching other artists on YouTube. I wanted to give back a little bit, and hopefully maybe be able to help other artists and make a little bit of extra money myself. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, thanks for sticking this far, and I think that you're doing something great for yourself and your career. Okay, here we go. I'm starting to kind of blend in some of these lighter areas now that I've got a darker back. You see what I mean? So like, look at that dark background, and now look at the lighter stuff that I did initially. I just went back kind of over the leg a little bit. I'm going over some of these darker parts in the cloak, which, by the way, cloaks are a major pain in the ass. As you can see, I'm just kind of, it's, unless you've already drawn this thing out, and even then, you still have to do a lot of looking up and down, back at your reference, back at your tattoo, back at your reference, in order to get all this detail right. So details can really be time consuming and really cause a lot of, discomfort on the client. So sometimes it's great to outline the whole thing and then, do half of the tattoo and come back later. You can always do that. If the client gets sick of sitting there for 3 hours while you're, detailing out all this crazy stuff, you can always tell them, hey man, great, no problem. I'll book you for my next available session. However, this guy was a beast, and he just didn't mind sitting there with me. He knew I was filming this, so he was pretty cool. All right, so most of the heavy darks are out. I'm also looking at the lightest light, say in the leg. And yeah, even though the statue is pretty much all gray all the way across, I'm using my discernment to decipher which areas are truly, truly dark and which areas are more of a highlight. And in those highlight areas, I'm just leaving it skin tone. So that becomes my highlight, Now I'm working in that upper corner below the wing on the cloak, and that's one of those areas where it's like, okay, let's see what we get here. I'm gonna try not to pack in too much dark right away. I'm gonna basically map out what I'm looking at. I'm gonna work with the detail and make sure that I'm putting everything in there right. Okay, so we're in the super delicate territory and the please don't fuck this up territory of the head. Now at this point, I've already been tattooing a couple of hours and my back hurts. I'm already kind of like been there. And so it's really important for me to like take my time and be just as delicate as I was initially. Especially because any of these little, tiny, super tiny lines later on are really going to look messed up if I push too hard or I zip through it too fast and I'm not just being careful. So it's really important to stay consistent. That's like the number one thing when it comes to tattooing. Just be like a machine. Be as consistent as you can. Yeah, it gets uncomfortable. It really does. And it's good to take breaks and it's good to stretch and get a snack or smoke a cig or whatever it is you need to do to like stretch and get refreshed, so when you come back at it, you're coming at back at it with your best. Again, here I'm just doing the same thing I did initially. Okay, this is going to be solid black. This is a darkest part. This is over here is going to be a lighter part. So I'm doing all that kind of stuff again, just to make sure that that I can get the effects that I want. Again, the devil is in the detail, so we're going back through everything really lightly, just giving us enough reference to see, where our darks are going to go and where our midtones are going to go and all that kind of stuff. So now that the angel's pretty much outlined, we can go back in and just kind of fly through the shading a little bit. Again, it's this was a 3.5 hour tattoo. And we're only 30 minutes into the video, so it's important to remember that if you don't have patience to sit through a video this long, then tattooing might be a little difficult. Yeah, the incentive is greater maybe because you're getting paid for it, but again, it's patience is the whole name of this game. And you can see I already started doing the face. I pretty much went through there just with my my mag and kind of just paid really good attention to what I was doing and worked on the face in a quick way. So here we go. We're doing the same thing. 5.6 volts. I'm going to do my best to scoot through the shading process. Again, a lot of this angel is super dark, which is great for me because I don't have to match a bunch of light tones. I can kind of scoot through the darkest part and then skip to a mid-tone. So like right now I'm using the black. And on the face and on some of these other parts where you see it's not as dark as the black, I skip to my mid-tone. So my mid-tone is a cup by itself of, say, 10 drops of black, dynamic ink, and then distilled water. And it's one of the larger, like 1-inch cups. So mid-tone is a pretty good mid-tone. And when it fades in, it's going to fade in super nice and buttery. The other thing, too, is like, I really have never liked the term saturation. It bothers me. I don't know why, because I just feel like it implies that the liquid, of the ink is going to do something itself. And I just don't, that's just not the case. What's doing it is you taking your time to rake those needles across the skin in such a way that the ink is now in the skin. So no, it's not the ink isn't just slapping on there and creating this wet, field of wetness. You have to, in a microscopic way, go in and rake those needles across the skin gently and consistently enough, and also ironically deep enough to make that stay. So that whole term saturation just irks me for some reason. Even though I know it's a great way to explain it, it just has always bothered me. There's some ink coming out there. I guess that's our saturation, right? Being a jerk. Okay, so you can always turn your mag sideways or diagonally in order to get those lines. You don't necessarily have to do everything with like a 3-liner or a 5-liner. You can use your mag like a paintbrush and turn it on its side, and since it's a curved mag, you're not going to be slicing in a ridiculous way. You've got a little bit more of a soft edge there. I guess that's what they're calling it these days, soft edge. And you can just kind of like create lines that way. Here you see I'm using the edge of this mag kind of like a liner. You can actually see like those 3 little dots I just put down and the edge there. All that is, I'm using it like a liner. Again, you want to do this just by grazing the skin. You don't want to get too crazy. And even if you do it and graze the skin and it's not satisfactory or dark enough, just do it again. Go back over it real lightly and you'll get a cool effect without overworking the skin. Again, I just love the impact of this guy, how dark he is, and how fun it was to create all these midtones. You can see that's a watery wash there. That's more of the mid-tone wash, which is like, the term, saturation also describes the amount of like actual tones that are across a field of the image. So like there's a mid-tone pretty much throughout this whole guy. I wanted to give a heavy and fully shaded kind of look to him. So like a lot of times when you see portraits that have been done and they're really done nicely, or maybe they look a little bit too dark at first, you see ink all the way across the whole image, like the whole skull has got ink in it, or the whole portrait has got ink in it. That actually does create a field of saturation, but again, it's used in a different way than we talk about the tattoo. But that whole field there gives it a sense of substance, and also it brings out the lightest parts. So if you've got a super black and then a mid-tone and then a light tone and then a very light tone, and then the skin is the open or the lightest tone, or you put white in that little last area where there's no ink whatsoever, that's how you get that roundness. That's how you get that shape. The highlights themselves become the actual so you don't have to go in slow motion. This is a great example of dark to light, away from an edge, creating an edge. Sometimes on wings it works a little funny, like the bottom of the wing will have the darker part and it will go lighter, to represent the light shining down on them. I'm also going back in and kind of going over in a mid-tone all those areas like we talked about how I want to get the lightest part of the skin to be the white highlights. So I'm doing that, and I'm going back in and really packing the darks in there, and then taking a little dip in the mid-tone and just kind of grazing over the skin in a gentle way. The great thing about working on somebody who's super pale and not all sun damaged is that you can do that. You can just kind of barely fleck the skin and you get a brilliant result. So a lot of times if you're tattooing somebody who is like this gentleman who's like got a super fair complexion and you do it one way, and then the next day you're tattooing a 60-year-old surfer or like a biker or something with super tan arms and leathery skin, you might be frustrated because you're going to come up against the old wow, what happened? I thought I had this. It gets really confusing and upsetting because you're like, man, I was good yesterday and that tattoo went great. Why did it change? So in any of those cases with like an elderly person or a super tan person, the best thing we can do is just slow down, man. Just slow down, go back over it in a gentle way and do basically the same thing, but just in a slower and gentler way. There we go. That's it, guys. Thanks so much for hanging out to the end of the video. I can put the reference picture in the actual description box below. Also, please follow me on Instagram, Jesse Britton Tattoo, and I hope that you guys subscribe to the channel. I look forward to seeing some of you and talking to some of you guys and hearing your comments. Thanks.